Hi, and thanks for joining me today. We have some special guests. We have John Richardson and Keith Redmond on again because we have a bunch of updates going on, a lot of news. We didn't get the FATCA repealed as we wanted to. We didn't get TTFI as we wanted to. And we're dealing with a couple nasty surprises from tax reform. So, Keith, John, thanks for joining us today.
Well, thank you for having us.
Right on.
Nice
So
to be here.
why don't we get into the TTFI update, the Territorial Taxation for Individuals update? Kind of was, in tax reform, we were supposed to get.
It's not a surprise that it was not in the tax reform package that Congressman Brady had put out just last week. It is a separate bill. It will be a separate bill. It's going to be not included in a tax package. I just want to make that very clear. And the bill is being put into legislative language as we speak, and it will be introduced. This is according to George Holding's office, Congressman George Holding's office. It will be introduced before Christmas during the lame duck session.
Okay, that's great. I mean, I didn't know that was coming. All right. I mean, I was hearing rumors. So the standalone TTFI bill will be introduced before Christmas.
Before Christmas.
Wow.
That is what has been stated as of this writing.
Okay.
And it's being put into legislative language as we speak. So that's a positive step. But I just want to make it very clear that there were some expectations out there that it would have been put into another big package, and that's not the case. This is just a better way of handling the TTFI situation, to have it standalone.
Well, that's fantastic, and I would say maybe this is the time we talk about, because it is a standalone bill. Keith, you and I think John too, we all sort of comment on, unfortunately, the expat community isn't necessarily the unified voice we would like it to be. Because here we have a standalone bill that now is this bill. Do you know if this bill is getting bipartisan support as it is now?
They're in process right now of getting the bipartisan support, hence the reason why it's a standalone bill. So there's no other stuff that's involved that would diminish, if you will, any semblance of bipartisan support.
All right. Well, this is fantastic. So, I mean, this is the thing. Hey, guys, here it is. Republican, Democrat. We have sponsors. This bill. Let's get together on this and stop. I mean, we got to stop trashing the other side. We all can work together to get this meaningful reform. This is incredible.
And I think it's important to, I know we're going to be talking about this, and it's important not just trashing one side versus the other, us versus them, et cetera, but to really sincerely unite. And the reason why I bring that up, and the premise for this particular podcast, is the number of times, not just me, but others, have gone up on Capitol Hill and have met in the offices of congressmen, congresswomen, and senators. They all say the same thing. Americans overseas need to have a singular voice when it comes to their issues. And this is coming from Republicans up on the Hill and Democrats up on the Hill. And they have repeated this ad nauseum that makes a big difference.
There it is, guys. So let's work together. And you know what? You don't have to like everything about Republicans. And you don't have to like everything about Democrats. But if you want to make a positive change in your life, here, right, get in touch right now to say, hey, pass this thing. This would be a great idea for all of us. And I mean, it really would. Yeah. And especially when you look at some of these, the things that exist now, that how tax reform actually kind of made living overseas a little bit harder. And I think the first thing I'll talk about is the transition tax. If there's any updates on that, now we have a bunch of videos on that. We've done it with John, sort of explaining how it works. And so, John, what's going on with the transition tax? Is there any regulatory help that you know?
Well, I think the short answer is nothing that will help with December 15th tax returns. There is, of course, you could get relief, I guess, in three ways. You can get it through a change in the law, which clearly we haven't had, at least to date, so Congress has done nothing about it. We can get it in terms of the administration of the law, which would be via extensions or possibly a de minimis amount or something like that. I believe there's been some discussion of that with no positive outcome, at least as of yet. There is talk of a lawsuit organized by Monty Silver, which would, as I understand it, be based primarily on the failure of Treasury to abide by the provisions of the Regulatory Flexibility Act, which would require them to consider small business corporations in compiling their massive and completely incomprehensible regulations. But there is engagement for sure. There's plenty of opposition to it. As of yet, there is no guarantee of any positive relief on that. And this is problematic because a number of people who believe they may be affected by it are in the position of having to file tax returns this month. So that's where we are there.
Now,
and I think it's important. I'd like to add something, and it just goes back to the initial premise for this call about a united principle. And I don't mean to, I'm going to state what that united principle is that, think about this, is that the people the transition tax and GILTI are harming are those Americans overseas with small to medium-sized businesses who have been U.S. tax compliant.
That's
those
right.
Americans overseas with small to medium-sized businesses who have not entered their U.S. tax system are the ones who are feeling very grateful right now because they haven't. So the U.S. tax compliant Americans overseas are the ones who are in the terrible situation. And that goes back to the overall arching united principle is that the U.S. needs to cease imposing its tax code on tax residents of other countries. And this is what John Richardson has been saying for a long time, and it has to be repeated over and over, and that's where Americans overseas must unite.
Yeah, absolutely, because, and it's so backwards that the way, it's set up is that if you come clean, and this is what I've noticed from the very first Offshore Voluntary Disclosure Initiative in 2009, we would have people that would make a disclosure in 2009, and that's back when the IRS treated everyone sort of the same. And you were subject, if you did something innocent, you were subject to the same penalty as a person who did something intentional. And the IRS figured that out later to say, oh, yeah, we should be treating people differently. If they're living overseas, we have this disclosure program that's pretty good. There's going to be some costs associated with it. But, something that stops people from getting into compliance, and the level of compliance of expats is pretty low overall from my calculations. When you insert things like the transition tax, it's not helping. It's not going to help people say, okay, you know what, it's going to be worth it to get into the system, and the IRS is going to be treating me fairly. Anything going on with GILTI that, any good news going on there, regulatory or otherwise?
Well, the proposed regulations on that, I think, came out November the 26th. And of course, they're aimed primarily at multinational corporations. And as usual, they're incomprehensible. The situation for Americans abroad with small businesses. So just this week, I did a 3-part video series with Dr. Karen Alpert in Australia. I did a number of these on the transition tax with her as well. We think that the use of the 962 election, which is available to individuals, can be a very helpful mitigating factor. With that, of course, it depends on a number of issues, the tax rate in the country, et cetera.
Right there, right. Yeah, 962 makes sense if you're high tax, I would say, yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, it's a very, very dismal situation on that. I see the transition tax as punishing you for your past and GILTI as ruining your future. I think that for individuals, they probably should rethink whether they should be running their businesses through corporations. And ultimately, I think that the GILTI provisions means the end of U.S. citizenship for those who, are in the unfortunate situation of having tried to comply with these laws all these years. I mean, it's just over the top. The compliance costs alone are enough to
prohibitive.
Ruin small businesses.
Yeah.
And then, of course, you never even know if you're in compliance because, for years, Americans abroad filed these 5471s, I think, without any, rigid adherence to U.S. standard accounting. And it would seem to me that the whole GILTI thing puts pressure on them to make sure that they're doing these things in accordance with U.S. accounting principles as well, which is going to add yet another level of complexity. As it stands, U.S. citizenship is simply not sustainable for those Americans abroad who attempt to file the taxes.
And I think it's important, if I may just interject for a second, most particularly for your audience who is a stateside audience in the United States, is that we're not talking about Americans overseas not interested or unwilling to file and pay necessary taxes, because that's what they do where they live. The individual American overseas as well as the American overseas with a business. They do the filing and paying the appropriate taxes based on the tax laws of where they live. So I think it's important to drive home that point as well as people are listening to this podcast.
Great point. And you know what, Keith, you're bringing up something I wanted to talk about. I don't think we planned on this, but we had some changes come up since the last time we talked. And one of them, on our last phone call, you mentioned to me that you helped somebody sort of try to get to the right tax professional, help them out who wanted to make a disclosure. The IRS announced a new offshore voluntary disclosure practice. So OVDP now stands for Offshore Voluntary Disclosure Practice instead of program. They released that on November 20th. And, when I looked at that program, that's strictly for people who have criminal exposure. I mean, you have real criminal exposure.
And that is the intent of OVDP, whether it be called OVDP, P for program or P for practice. Never meant for Americans living overseas at all. Full stop.
And that is correct, because I talked to the developer of the first OVDI, the 2009, and he was an attorney on the UBS case, and he set it up in 2009. He said this, and now he's in private practice, by the way. He said this OVDP, no, people are forcing. He goes, he was very disappointed with a lot of professionals who scaremonger people into the full OVDP program because that was never its intent. And he was on the same, he agreed with us on many of the same things, that if they're going to make a disclosure, 9 times out of 10, it's going to be some sort of streamlined disclosure, which has no penalty. Now, I would say, here's the teaser for a lot of expats. If you have made a disclosure and you might be feeling a little foolish, well, if we do get the TTFI bill, and that now I do believe you told me this a few times. I heard this from a few different sources as we go along, and Solomon Yu, who has been instrumental in getting this going, he says the proposal in there is it's pretty cool. It could be better, but I think it's pretty good. Basically certify last 3 years of compliance if you're an expat, and then every year you just file a certification saying, yep, I lived overseas, I don't have to file anything. So what that means is for the people who have made streamlined disclosures and are feeling like, oh, maybe I shouldn't have because so many people haven't. Well, if this TTFI bill gets passed, you don't have to. You're done. You basically will be able to do that. You'll be able to make that declaration quickly. It's like, yeah, it's not that much fun to do that streamlined disclosure. Could be a lot worse. But once you're done with it, look, it's pretty good. You're going to be left alone.
Well, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's important that that you're stating streamlined disclosure, because I just need to, and you're absolutely right, Anthony, on how you're speaking about this. I just want to drive home a point is that I also spoke with the person who put together the second OVDP program. And again, that is not meant for Americans overseas. And we have, and I have witnessed this myself. We have very reputable, very large accountancy firms who are forcing Americans overseas into the OVDP program. And I will state right here on this podcast that if you have, as an American overseas, any tax compliance firm telling you you need to enter the OVDP program, hang up the phone or walk out of their offices. It is not for you. It is not for you, and you should not be using them.
That's right. And it doesn't matter how. I mean, you're talking about Big Four accounting firms, and we've seen it too. Though our clients have told us they've talked to the Big Four accounting firms, and they said, "Oh, I had to do this. I had no choice. I had no choice but to do this." And it's absolutely ridiculous when you analyze the facts. I guess if you're an expat on the run overseas from the U.S. law, well, you probably have other things to worry about than your tax compliance. But if you're living overseas, it's one of the worst criminal cases in the world to bring. You have to convince a jury to convict you. Well, the jury themselves is not going to know that there's worldwide. They're not going to know. Like, well, he didn't pay, but he was living in Germany. Why does he have to pay? So there's no way. These cases just aren't going to do it. There's enough domestic tax evasion. IRSCID has enough work to do domestically. They really do. And I mean, if you think about the amount of indictments they have each year, about 3,000 indictments, to administer a tax code that sort of has a global impact, but domestically you have about 340 million people. So just think about that, and think about all the things that are going on. Why would they want to bother with the headaches of trying to deal with an expat who, by the way, when they file everything correctly, might actually have no tax due? When you have the foreign income exclusion and foreign tax credit in these various treaties, you can have income and not have any tax due, so they'd be wasting their time. In order to evade taxes, there actually does have to be a tax due. It's really important when you're talking to somebody and you want to, if you feel that you need to make some sort of disclosure, don't get scared into it. I'm so disappointed that it's still going on. I'm really disappointed that it's still going on.
It happened to a gentleman with whom I was speaking the other day, and he was smart enough to just walk away and gave me a call, and we spoke about it. And this goes back to the united principle, is that the U.S. has got to cease imposing its tax code on tax residents of other countries. And Americans overseas, regardless of their party affiliation, who they are, their socioeconomic status, have to cease being a supplicant to the United States, and they have to cease living in this U.S. culture of fear. They have to stop and start standing up for their rights.
Together. We got to be on the same team. Now, one more thing I want to touch on, and I think that, I'm just going to say this, there's a repeal FATCA. We've started with that years ago. We haven't gotten repealed, and we have this TTFI bill. I would say if I was going to prioritize one over the other, I actually would want to see TTFI first, because it would eliminate many of the problems that that FATCA creates for the person living overseas. Now, do you guys agree, or do you guys think that TTFI is more important than repeal FATCA, or vice versa, or both similar, or TTFI is good enough?
Well, I'll let John go first. I have my thoughts on that, but go ahead, John, if you have any thoughts you'd like to share.
Oh, I think very, very clearly the priority, we had to choose between them. I think very, very clearly the priority is for everybody to unite behind the principle that the United States should not be imposing worldwide taxation on people who are tax residents of other countries and do not live in the United States. Once that ceases, there's no reason to deny bank accounts to people who live outside the United States, etc. And FATCA, as horrible as it is, at least reverts to a purpose of essentially tracking foreign bank accounts of homeland Americans.
And I think the other thing, if I may add, is that we can't look at FATCA just within the confines of an American point of view. Because right now, because of the good works of people like Fabien Laagre and others, we have, for example, France, who is pushing back on the United States in regards to FATCA. There is a French FATCA lawsuit against the French government that is in process in France. This has also gone up to the European Union level. There's also been 2 or maybe 3 French delegations who have gone to Washington, D.C. to address the situation, not only with FATCA because of the accidental American situation, but also because the United States is breaching all of their agreements with their countries because of not reciprocating under the FATCA agreements. So we have pushback starting from other countries. And this is where Americans overseas who happen to be a citizen of the country in which they live really need to start pushing back on their respective governments there to push back on the United States. So it needs to be done within the United States, and it also needs to be done with governments outside the United States. And right now, France is leading the way.
All right. Well, fantastic. So I think we could conclude by saying, hey, number one priority right now, I'm going to say, has got to be getting TTFI, the territorial tax for individuals, passed. It's a bipartisan bill that's going to be coming up before Christmas. This could be a great Christmas present for every expat, but we need to have that unified voice. Democrat, Republican, socialist, libertarian, it doesn't matter. If you live overseas,
doesn't matter.
You got to get behind this and contact your representative. Here's one area, you know, I mean, we live in a times of so much political polarization. Here's something that could bring us all together. It doesn't matter who we are. We all can agree that this does not serve any legitimate purpose of a government. And what's going on? You're just creating compliance work and headaches and penalty risks, but you're not bringing in revenue in a cost-effective manner. And in fact, you might be spending far more in all of these initiatives than any additional revenue that has been brought in, and that just can't be good for anybody. So with that, I'm going to leave you guys with, I'm going to ask you guys for your closing thoughts, and we'll conclude. So Keith, what do you say for your closing thoughts?
Well, I think you said it right there. I think, again, I just have to drive home the point that Americans overseas really have to unite, because if they do not unite to have their voices heard, nobody else is going to do it. The paradigm must change.
There we go.
Regardless of affiliation. They need to get behind what John has said, what I have said, to stop the U.S. from imposing its tax code, worldwide taxation, on tax residents of other countries. Full stop. No ifs, ands, or buts. That needs to be done first before anything else.
All right. John, same question. Your closing thoughts.
Anthony, a moment ago, I absolutely agree. I think we all agree that the United States has got to not be imposing worldwide taxation on people who are tax residents of other countries. We all agree on that, and you went on to say that, you know, make the point that it wasn't bringing in any revenue and that sort of stuff. And I agree it's probably not bringing in any revenue. But I feel very strong that that is not the reason why the United States needs to change course here. The reason that the United States needs to stop imposing worldwide taxation on people who are tax residents of other countries and don't live in the United States is because it's absolutely immoral, absolutely wrong, absolutely infringement of the sovereignty of other nations, and absolutely siphoning capital that has a non-U.S. tax source from those countries to the United States. The economic argument has nothing to do with this. Now, it may be that because under U.S. law, laws can't be changed unless they're revenue neutral, that somehow or other the issue has been confused here. But the bottom line is that this has to stop because it's wrong, and the United States should take the initiative of stopping this completely wrong, immoral, and shameful behavior, because if it doesn't, sooner or later, other countries absolutely are going to stop it for them. And this is going to be a very embarrassing, unpleasant situation for the United States. We see this played out also in terms of GILTI, the transition tax, trying to impose a state tax on non-resident aliens who die with assets in the U.S. of over $60,000. The United States is using its tax code as a way of carrying on a kind of warfare against other countries, and it's sooner or later going to come to an end. The only thing we're betting on is when and how, but the reason it's got to end has nothing to do with cost. It's got to end because it's wrong.
All right, beautiful. Thank you so much, John. And I love all your one-liners and your quotes. We need to keep track of all of them. You have so many good ones. Absolutely right. So please share this video, okay, and get involved. And I'm going to put some links where you can get below the video where you guys can contact your representatives and spread the word. Join, if you haven't so far, get on the American Expatriates 2.0 group on Facebook. We'll give a link to that. Push this on Twitter. We should get bipartisan support. Every expat, every American should want this because it's just good for America and it's good for the world. This is Anthony Parent of Parent LLP, IRSMedic, and I thank you for watching.